I'm Scott L. Miller. It's the 24th of August, 2023. This is my vlog of daily life living in Leon, Nicaragua. Today, we're going to be tackling something a little bit out of the ordinary for the show. We're going to be talking about what speeds and types of internet access you need because as expats or tourists or digital nomads, as people looking to work and live outside of the United States, you may have a bit of misinformation caused by the standard marketing predatory tactics in the US. And I want to explain some of these things because I'm a technologist and this is stuff that I do and I explain this to companies all the time. And I think with a little bit of information from this, we can make it a lot better for you to be able to get good, low-cost internet when you're traveling and actually get what you need rather than getting fleeced or simply feeling like you're not able to get what you want when in reality, you probably have some pretty good options. We're going to get to all that right after the bump. All right, so when we're talking about internet, there's a couple things that we need to think about. And the biggest one is, we talk about this all the time in every market, is what is the speed of your internet? But this is very misleading, so it's important for us to really talk about this. So when we're talking about internet speed, we have three basic things that we need to consider. Because speed is not as simple as being just a single number, not in any way, shape, or form. And there's actually a lot of things beyond the things that we're going to say that are pretty impactful. There are concepts such as jitter, which is whether your data is arriving in order or out of order, or the concept of lost packets, the idea that not all of your data goes through and only some of it. Those things are really important, but we're going to assume that your jitter is low enough that you don't care, and that dropped packets are essentially non-existent. If you have a bad connection and you're getting jitter or worse, dropped packets, then these other numbers kind of become meaningless because your connection is no good. So that's what we call a dirty connection, or just a bad one. But that's a separate issue. That does not happen under normal circumstances anymore. And so we're really gonna just pretty much ignore it, and we're gonna distill as reasonably as we can. So when you're talking to IT professionals, you're talking to six-figure people, experts in networking, these are the three numbers that they generally talk about, because we assume your jitter is okay, we assume your drop packets are okay, and you're really only going to struggle with those things if you're doing something really complicated and you're engaging professionals to look at it. Yes, they are things that as a lay person you may be able to understand, but they're going to derail us from a reasonable conversation. They are certainly not things that you can talk to your vendor about and say, well, I need a no drop packets and I need good jitter. They won't even understand that. Or if they do, there's nothing they can do about it. It is, the quality of your connection is the quality of your connection. They can't necessarily fix that in any reasonable sense. So more importantly, we have these three numbers that in the real world, we can specify ahead of time and see what we can do. So the one that everyone talks about is your download speed. This is the amount, and speed is a really poor terminology here. The real term that we use is bandwidth, and it should be volume. It is how much data we can move. And I'm going to make some analogies here to make this as simple as possible, because data networks work a lot like highways. So download speeds, we talk about all the time, and these, when we were back in like 1999 with telephones, remember dial-up, you'd put your modem and put the phone on or whatever, and you had modems, and they would make all the beep, blah, 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 stuff while you waited, and then it would send data. That was the best part of the show ever. And they would talk about speeds like 16K, 33K, supposedly 53K, but no one ever actually got 53K. It wasn't actually legal in the US. Everyone sold these high-speed 53K modems, and no one ever said, but they're illegal, so they'll automatically detect that you're in the US and switch to 33 or 37K. That was it. They were like, haha, we got everyone to spend on these super fast modems that you couldn't use. You were only allowed to use them when you're inside your house and running special phone cables between two computers, which no one did and no one understood, so they completely useless. Anyway, so that's where we started, 53K, that's 53,000 bytes per minute. Well, we don't talk about in the Ks anymore, right? When we had DSL in the early 2000s, some people had like 128 or 256 or 384, 512K. 768K, that was a long time ago. By like 2001, most people were talking about speeds in the megs, millions of bytes per second that are moved, not thousands. So we talk about 1 megabit connections. Those are super slow by today's standards. 10 megabit connections. Those are finally fast enough that there's still things we can buy today. Basically, the slowest thing you can buy in any market anywhere in the world today is somewhere between 2 and 3 megabits per second. And those are rare. I like really never see those. But 5, I'll start to encounter those from time to time. 10 is pretty safe that you're going to find 10 megabit connections. And by safe to find, I mean you could go that slow in most markets. When people are talking about big numbers, 100 megabits, 300 megabits, a gigabit per second, that's what they're talking about, their download speeds in the US. Okay, so that's the first number. And that represents, if you had a highway, let's say you have a house and you want to do something in your house and you have a highway connected to your house. We'll assume there's no other people along the way, right? There's your house, a highway, and the people who are sending you stuff. Your download speed refers to the amount of, let's say, boxes. Boxes are a lot like packets. So if you wanted boxes of deliveries from Amazon to come to your house, you would be thinking about how many lanes wide is the highway running from the Amazon warehouse to your house. And if it's 10 lane wide, that means that 10 trucks can come down that highway at a time, not necessarily how fast they can get there, but they all drive at about the same speed. That's what's interesting about how this works. In the networking world, the trucks move at about the same speed no matter what you do. So what we are concerned about is how many lanes wide the highway is and how long the highway is. And we're going to get to that. But in this first bit, it's how many lanes come towards you. So we're going to say that we're going to ignore how long the highway is because it's not really important to this part of the discussion. And we're going to say it's 10 lanes wide. And we'll pretend that each lane represents 1 megabit worth of boxes. They can deliver per lane in the highway, because no one else is on the highway. This is just coming to you. It's a private highway. They're delivering 1 million boxes per second in the trucks coming down. That'd be really fast. But you know what I mean? They're coming towards you, and that one lane can have a line of trucks. That's how fast. So if you have 10 of those lanes, you're 10 times as fast as one lane. There's no traffic, right? We're not counting for collisions. We're not accounting for weather, like imagine perfect conditions. They're driving towards you. That's what it works. That's download, how fast they can drive boxes to you. You're not asking how long did it take the first box to get you. You're asking at what rate, once they've filled the highway, do they continue to arrive? 1 million boxes every second per lane. So in this example, 10 lanes, 10 million boxes per second, or 10 megabits per second. That is how we measure download speed. Now, we also need to have an upload speed. Data needs to come to you, and it also needs to go away from you. So we need some amount of speed in the opposite direction, and obviously this is exactly the same type of measurement, right? So if we measure megabits in one direction, we're going to measure megabits in the other direction. So the same thing, if you were to have your house and you want to ship things back to Amazon, right? You're getting 1 million things per second. Well, at some point you had to request those things in the first place. You had to send a message to Amazon and say, hey, I would like a box sent to me. That takes something going the other way. And some of those you're going to need to return. Oh, this isn't what I ordered. Send it back. You're going to be really busy with 1 million boxes per second. So you're going to be sending those things back. So you need what we call an upload speed. You're going to be sending the other way. So the same thing. How many lanes do you want? Every lane can handle 1 megabit per second. The lane thing is a little bit weird, but it works. So in a lot of cases, you want the same in both directions, but you may want faster download than upload. A lot of people think that that makes sense, and for a lot of people it does make sense. So that's a common thing. You'll have faster download than you have upload, no problem. So the same thing. You don't care how long it took an individual box to get from your house to Amazon. You care about the pace at which the boxes arrive once you filled the highway. So let me give some examples of how this works with a real world application. Let's talk about Netflix. This could also apply to YouTube or Amazon Prime or the Disney Plus, whatever that is. Yep. So with these things, you go and you sit down at your computer, sit down at your TV, and whatever device you are using, and you say, okay, I want to watch Three's Company, right? Start streaming Three's Company to me. Well, it doesn't start instantly. It takes time for that show to start and get to you. And you know this, you watch it buffer, you watch it do things. What you're waiting for, essentially, not exactly, but basically where that wait comes from, you have to wait for them to find the show and get started. Like there's multiple things that you're waiting for. But one of the most important things is it has to start sending you the data from that show. And the first packet might take a few milliseconds to get to you, maybe 100 milliseconds. That's a little bit long, but it's realistic. 100 milliseconds for the very first, oh, I just started receiving it. You can't start watching it at that point, but the very first packet arrived. Once enough packets arrive to, like, you know, show an image on the screen, it still needs to receive a few more to get ready for the next image or whatever. At some point, it can start showing you the video. So the thing you're waiting for is for that highway to fill up and a few other things, but that is the network wait. That is the delay coming from your ISP, is waiting for those packets to get there so it has the highway full, so then it can continuously deliver you that show at a constant rate. Now, if they're really slow, if that highway is really long, that could take a little while, 100, maybe instead of 10 milliseconds, it's 100 milliseconds. Or if it's really crazy, maybe it's 1,000 milliseconds. But once it's going, then it's going to be able to send it to you at a constant rate because its bandwidth, or its the download speed, is what it is. So if we have 100 megabits per second and Netflix needs something like 5, then we have no problem. We have enough bandwidth. As long as it gets the highway full, it can keep delivering 5 of those lanes continuously for forever. But like any highway, you can't get one truck magically down the highway faster than it takes to drive down the highway. But you can do 5 all at the same time without any problem. You can do 100 all at the same time, running side by side down the lanes, that you can do it all at once. It's the same example. This is said in IT a lot. If it takes one woman 9 months to have a baby, you can't have a baby in 1 month by having 9 women who are pregnant at the same time. But at the end of 9 months, you can have 9 babies, right? So you can increase the bandwidth of having babies, but you can't speed up an individual baby. Same thing with data coming down the internet. So that's a really important thing that people do not understand. You could live directly next door to Netflix and have a fiber line that runs straight over from them, and it's inches long, and you're moving at the speed of light. And if your bandwidth is 100 megabits, the time it takes for the movie to start, instantaneous. You'll never notice. So fast. But it won't go faster than 100 megabits per second, but it doesn't matter because you only use 5 for Netflix. You might use more now, but it's not a lot. If you lived on the other side of the planet and it took 5 seconds, that would be extreme, but it could. 5 seconds, maybe you're using satellite, goes up, bounces around, comes down. 5 seconds for that first packet to get to you. You're waiting 5 seconds just to know it's responding. Once it gets there, if you still have that 100 megabits per second speed, yeah, you'll have a 5-second delay to start the movie. But once it starts, you're receiving, because that highway is full, you're receiving at that continuous 100 megabits per second. So you're having no problem. It's just that initial delay. That's the only spot that you notice the speed. So that delay for the packets in the general sense is known as latency. And we measure that, so it's called latency in the industry. In consumer products, the tool that we use to measure latency is called a ping. This is a little bit weird in terminology, but it comes from sonar. So the actual software protocol ping is the packet internet groper, but so it actually stands for something stupid, but they use the word ping because it's like sonar, right? You send the tiniest blip out, the smallest possible thing you send out, and you see how long it takes for it to return. So that time that it takes to do that is known as the latency. And that's how long it takes, which it's really a measurement of how long the highway is, right? So, and it's actually an artifact of the physical distance of the wires. So, for example, here in Nicaragua, if we want to test how long it takes for our network to get to our local servers, we can test it. It takes a couple milliseconds. It's typically 5 to 10 milliseconds. If you want to see how long it takes to get a ping out to the United States, well, that's a different thing. And that typically is like 55 milliseconds. And so that gives you an idea of how far away the United States is. If you want to ping, say, Europe, then if you're pinging Europe, likely you're going to be over 100 milliseconds. And it's not as the crow flies, it is as the wires go under the sea. And you can figure out the paths that are taken sometimes by how long that ping takes. So this is a really important artifact, because for some things like Netflix or YouTube, you don't really care about latency. They're very excited to see the show. They yelled telefono, but I don't know how I could get them my phone number as they drive by. So Netflix and YouTube, things like that, shows that you're streaming are essentially one direction. You make a really small request to get the show, and then the show itself is a huge payload. And so you really don't care about latency, because, you know, if you had to wait 5 extra seconds for a movie to start, I don't know anyone who actually cares about 5 seconds, and no one waits 5 seconds. It's more like waiting 1 second more in an extreme situation. It's not a really noticeable amount of time. And so by and large, people don't care at all what the latency is when you're just streaming a video. But when you're doing other things, that latency can be really important, especially things that are bi-directional. So some of the things that are really heavily affected by a long latency are things like voice calls. Not voice messages, because that's, again, one direction. You say, oh, there's a message, send it to me, and you wait an extra second for it to be sent to you. But if you're talking to someone on the phone, and I say hello, and they say, hi, how you doing? And I say, I'm good, how are you? Right? If I have to wait an extra second before they hear me say, hi, hello, and I have to wait an extra second after that extra second for them to say hello, and then for me to, like, that starts adding up really fast, and it only takes roughly 200 milliseconds, so 1/5 of a second of a delay of that nature before people start to be unable to use telephone calls, because the latency is so long that they start talking over each other all the time because they can't tell when the other person is speaking. You're basically facing a really weird time dilation in your conversation, and so it throws people off a lot. So if you're going to be doing calls of any nature, you care a lot about your latency. If you're going to be doing anything really interactive, you care about your latency. Things that are not latency affected at all, basically, are websites, like traditional websites, like I'm just looking at a website, streaming videos, audio, anything that's streaming in one direction, and email. None of those things care what your latency is, really. Like, you will never notice whether it's 1 millisecond or 1 second, which is 1,000 times different. So, like, you just won't notice. Maybe you could detect it, but you don't care. When you're doing interactive things, like video chats, telephone calls, database calls, you're running applications that are talking to a database, things like that, where it's going back and forth a lot, that is when you really notice latency. And so, really important, people at home tend to stream and send emails and watch movies, and go to websites. So a lot of home users focus on download bandwidth because it's the only thing that's super important to them. And businesses tend to focus on latency because they need everything to work really solidly. They need things to be responsive. They need people to be able to do things back and forth. They need to be able to make calls. They need them to sound good. So latency tends to be where they focus. Now, what's really important in a lot of this is that the amount of anything that you need is not that much. As long as everything works, right? We talked about how jitter's a problem. We talked about how dropped packets are a problem. Those are problems, right? Assuming you don't have problems, how much of these other things do you need? What numbers are realistic? So this is really important because the United States and Canada work really hard. And by these countries, I mean the companies that represent the infrastructure of these countries. So the Verizons, the T-Mobiles, the AT&Ts, the Comcasts, the Coxes, the Rogers, the Canadian Bell, like all the Bell Canada, sorry, all those companies, right? They all have a very strong vested interest in harming the public. While they all operate as arms as the government, they are not working in the interest of the people. They are not there to educate you. They are not your friends. They are there to use their monopoly positions to harvest as much of your money and turn it into what is essentially taxes as possible. They will never act in your interest. They will never give you an honest answer, and nor will they hire competent, honest people because there's no reason to. They have no business model that says, ooh, giving good advice would be good for us. Absolutely not. They work in a world where they make their maximum profits by convincing you of unreasonable things. Some things that are important. The most expensive thing for a provider to give you is good latency. There's essentially nothing they can do if their latency is bad. Because, like we said, this is caused by your location, the physical distance of the wires that are in the ground. There's a few other factors, like how many pieces of equipment they have to go through along the path, but essentially, it is physically how far you are from the things you're trying to access. So one, they don't have control of what you're trying to access or where its location is. And two, they can't control, in most cases, how far those wires are in the ground. In some cases, they can. You can pay, in some situations, for upgraded wires. It would cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's not casual, but businesses sometimes do this. And sometimes, very rarely, fiber will outperform copper in this latency number, but it is rare, and the amount that it outperforms it in a local connection standpoint would never be an entire millisecond. We would be talking nanosecond performance increase, very, very small. And depending on the equipment that is used, it could actually go the other way. So you have to be really careful. So there's a few things that they can do, but by and large, they can't change your latency. So that's not something we can go to them and talk about, and it's something they don't talk about with you because it kind of is what it is, but not always. Of the other two numbers, so it's important to note. So that means that latency is super expensive for them to do anything to improve. Of upload and download speeds, it is much cheaper to give you good download than it is to give you good upload. So they have a very strong interest in convincing you not to look at your upload speeds and to sell you as much download as possible for two reasons. One is that their download speeds are simply cheaper for them. If they want to give you 100 megabits of download or 100 megabits of upload, they can do the download at a fraction of the cost. The second part is that they know people who order lots of download almost never actually use it. So when they sell you a lot of download, just because they sell you that amount of speed does not mean you get that speed. Under very selective circumstances, you might have access to take advantage of that speed. It would be very rare for anything that is very fast to ever actually hit the kind of speeds that they provide for you. So let me give you an example. If you are watching Netflix, and Netflix uses somewhere in the vicinity of 5 megabits per second. I could be off by a little bit because they change from time to time as they speed up their videos and stuff. But in general, around about 5 megabits per second allows you to watch Netflix without any problems. Like, as long as they have no network problems, it'll just stream for forever. And it'll look great. It'll sound great. You'll have no blips, nothing. You are good to go. There might be blips, but it'll be like your computer didn't work, or Netflix computer didn't work, or something. But it's not the network having a problem for speed. If you want to watch 10 Netflix videos at the same time, we'll simply take 5 times 10. That's 50 megabits per second. Oh, are you gonna watch 10 Netflix at the same time? No, probably not in a home. If you are, well, you may want to have at least 50 megabits. Are you going to do other things while you're doing that? Are you going to download some big things? Like, I'm working on these videos. I am uploading and downloading massive videos. My videos use so much more megabits per second than a Netflix video. Netflix videos are around about 5 megabits per second. Mine are around 200, right? So that's crazy in the amount of bandwidth that is necessary to stream my videos. You never get to see my full quality videos, like, ever, right? Like, but when I'm uploading these videos, every one of these, like this talk that I'm doing right now. So first of all, this is in 5.3K, not in 4K like Netflix. It is in extremely more big bandwidth, big bit rate codecs and stuff than Netflix uses. So these are just huge. So if you watched Netflix continuously for 24 hours, you would only be around about the same amount of data being moved as me uploading one of these videos. And then I have to download it again. So I'm using I'm using a day of Netflix up, a day of Netflix down, just for the amount you're watching in this one video. And then once I've processed it all, and then I recompress it, and then I upload it again in a much smaller format, but it's still way more than Netflix. It's something like, I want to say 30 megabits per second. We're just talking big numbers, really big numbers when you're doing the stuff that I'm doing. If you're doing that on top of watching Netflix, yeah, you might need more speed. But it's worth noting, I have a family with a lot of people. Both of my kids like to watch videos during the day. My wife watches a lot of videos during the day. Sometimes Paul watches videos during the day. Our chef is streaming stuff all day long. I'm doing these crazy videos all day long. Several of us are also on computers working during much of the day. Marcella is here with her kids, and they're both on services streaming things all day long and playing video games, and she's online working. And we have 50 megabits per second, and we never notice a speed problem. Never. Now, we notice when the network has problems, but we never notice that the 50 megabits isn't fast enough, because it's plenty with all those people doing all those things and me doing really big media things that use a lot of bandwidth. So this is really important to comprehend just how little most people need. The numbers that they sell to you in the United States and Canada are absurdly large. I don't know anybody who has a speed above 100 megabits per second who even has a way to use it. Most people with 100 megabits connections, they never are able to use above about 20. The rest is 100% wasted. No amount how much, like if you're delivering, 100,000 boxes from Amazon and you pay for 100 million capacity, it doesn't speed up those boxes. Having excess, the only good that excess does for you is for the protection that if someday in the future you're going to use more than you're using now, you're ready. That's it. That is the sole benefit to having faster speeds. Now, if you're someone like me, and let's say I move from 50 megabits to 100 megabits. Well, it's true. In some cases, like I'm downloading these really big videos, I may be able to download them faster, but that's only true if the service I'm downloading them from, in my case, this is GoPro, is able to provide that speed. And I don't think GoPro is. My limiting factor on how fast I can get data from GoPro is how fast GoPro can provide it. It's not waiting on me. They have to also be able to provide more than 50 megabits per second. And per customer, I don't think they can, which is fine because who needs to go that fast? Pretty much nobody. I'm one of the most demanding GoPro cloud users on the planet, and I'm fine. So they don't need to go faster. I don't need to go faster. Chances are you don't need to go faster. If you think you need to go faster, really stop and think, what is it you're doing that is more demanding than I'm getting with lots of people and big media moving around? And the things that people tend to say, well, I make a lot of phone calls. Nothing uses less data than a phone call, right? So we're talking, so normal, think about, when you're talking about download speed, so 100 megabits per second, right? Well, that's 100 million bits per second. A completely ridiculously large phone call uses 100,000 bits per second. So for every megabit you have, you can make 10 full bandwidth phone calls, like stereoscopic, like really high quality, not like normal phone calls, not like cell phone calls. I'm talking like streaming your stereo system phone calls, really good quality, for 100 kilobits per second. So for every megabits, you get 10 of those at the same time, 10 concurrents, as we call them. So if you have 100 megabits, you can have 1,000 people on the phone all at the same time at maximum quality, all talking at the same time, because if anyone stops talking for a second, they use what's called silent suppression, and that rate drops. So the amount of phone calls you could actually make in real world usage with 100 megabits is far in excess of 1,000, just based on that alone. But then we need to go even further with real world codecs for telephony. We actually get far more than that. No one actually needs 100K per call. What we actually need is 10K per call. So that means that 100 megabit connection that a normal person will often have at home could handle 10,000 people constantly talking before we deal with silence suppression. So much closer to 15 to 20,000 phone calls all at once. 20,000. There's no call center in the world that I know of that has 20,000 people all on the phone all at once. And that's what people actually say. My phone company said I needed more bandwidth because I'm going to be on the phone. Like, this is like saying, you know, I ordered a cupcake and they say, well, cupcakes, you know, you can't take that home in your car. You need to hire a semi to move that to your house, right? When you work in IT and people say they're on the phone and they need more bandwidth, that's what we hear, right? We're going to take this cupcake, probably a mini cupcake, one of those little tiny ones, and we're going to palletize it. We're going to get a forklift. We're going to load it onto a semi. We're going to strap it down with cables, and we're going to move it down the highway on a big diesel, big rig truck to deliver that mini cupcake to your house, because we just convinced you that it won't fit in the trunk of your car, let alone in your pocket, right? This is nuts, but that's what they actually do. And I have so many customers that actually get told those things. They'll be told they got 300 meg. No, you need a gig to be able to make a phone call. How does a phone call use bandwidth? Think about, we've been making phone calls for hundreds of years. We didn't have speeds like this 100 years ago. Clearly, we don't need very much bandwidth to make phone calls. How they've convinced people that things like that exist, I have no idea how they've managed to trick so many people into thinking that big bandwidth is needed for simple things. It's getting dark out here. I'm hoping that the video works out pretty well. I found a nice field with a nice open view of one of the hills, and hopefully it looks good. The light is so dim. I know this is going to be a lot of noise, but it can't be helped. So this is download. You really don't need that much. How much do real people need? The normal home user needs about 10 megabits to be happy. And I recommend, if you can get it, 20. And if it's not a financial burden in any way, get 30. Getting above 30, I suggest you stop and think for a minute. Am I doing something that would actually benefit from more than 30 megabits? If you're surfing the web, that doesn't count. Are you sending emails? That doesn't count. Are you streaming Netflix? That could count if you're doing many different things at the same time. Like you're in one room streaming on a big 4K TV, someone else is streaming on 4K. But if some people are like on a computer just doing 720p in a little window, basically don't even count that. That's so background noise in your total amount of data, it may not even matter. And things like phone calls don't even hit the radar. Never include them, right? They're so small, they just don't matter. For normal people, 30 meg is just more than enough. And that's why here packages are normally sold in about that speed, because it's what's actually useful for real world people. Now, it's important to note, if you're downloading giant files for some reason, and giant means many gigabits, right? A lot of people are like, well, I got this PDF of something. That must be, no, that is not what we mean. We're talking giant video files. We're talking massive amounts of backup data. That's normally the biggest thing, is when companies are uploading and downloading backup data, looking at doing restores. That's not something for home users. If you're running a business and you got a lot of data locally stored and you got, okay, that's different. But when you're a home user, these things are really minor. And I don't mean your home backups. Those are small if done normally, right? We're talking about giant companies doing big things from servers. Those will get big. Otherwise, 30 megabits is a lot for you. Now, we're talking download. What if we start talking upload? What are you going to need? Well, in the United States, a lot of those services that do 300 megabits, even gigabit internet, are only giving you 10 megabit, maybe 20 megabit of upload. And most people don't notice, but this is where you actually get constrained, because these numbers are often so small compared to your download, and no one even looks at them, which tells you how unimportant your speed actually is. Because in IT circles, these are the numbers we generally work with. When someone says, I have 300 megabits, I go, no, you don't, you have 10. Right? I don't care what your largest number is, I care what your smallest number is. That's what's actually curtailing you. Is 10 megabits sufficient? And that's where I often see people having problems, and here's why. You're on a website, you've got a lot of people streaming things, you're doing a lot of activities, and suddenly you notice that you can't get things to respond. Well, if you're uploading a lot of data, and if you're uploading a lot of data, it is possible for that data to take all of the data going up, because 10 megabits gets small enough that what if you're doing a backup? What if you're like me and you're uploading these big video files? You could use all of the bandwidth that there is. And now when you request a website, it may not be able to get that request out for seconds or even a minute, because it's waiting on something that's already uploading, right? So this isn't waiting for the road to get filled. This is waiting for your turn to enter the highway from a warehouse that's currently already backed up, loading it as it is. So that's where we see people run into problems, is not that their download very often gets full, that's rare. It's that they have a tiny upload that they never look at, they never consider, and that's what they fill, and then things stop being responsive, even though they may have plenty of bandwidth. Even though they may have plenty of bandwidth to download more things, they can't get the request out to let people know that they want those things. And if you're doing something like making a phone call, you may have tons of bandwidth to hear someone, but you may have no bandwidth to get your call out. Now, there are a few things you can do. Outbound things, if you're getting into network engineering, you're hiring an IT professional, or you're really taking an interest and putting in some effort yourself, you can do some things called quality of service that will allow you to do things like say that voice calls for your telephone take priority over other things. And even if the network is saturated because you're using every bit of bandwidth, you're still going to put that call first, and the person on the other end will never hear that your network is overloaded. That's fine. We do that in business all the time, and we'll do things like, first thing is we prioritize voice, then we prioritize video chats, then we just go down the list, and at the very bottom is like email, because if your email takes an extra 5 seconds to send, I bet none of your users would ever even figure it out. And 5 seconds is an eternity in networking terms. So that's really good. My camera is always happier in direct sunlight. So next day. So learning from all this, the things that are most important when we're thinking about buying internet are almost always checking our latency and determining if it's going to be something that is adequate for us. Generally, we don't have control of this, but it is something to be aware of at the very least. And our upload speed is where the things are hidden. So when you're looking, never accept a single number. Your speed should be written in the terms of, if it's symmetrical, meaning both sides of the same speed, it'll either say symmetrical or bidirectional, and it'll say 100 megabits per second, and you know it's 100 up and 100 down. If you are getting a more normal service where it is asymmetrical, then you get a number that's something slash something download slash upload, which is confusing. You would think probably the other way around. So it's common to see something like a 100/10 or a 100/20. When you're talking to IT professionals, when you're thinking of how much performance you have, you really want to use that smaller number if you're only going to remember one number. I have a limit of 20. It is really easy for me to saturate a 20. And some things that will saturate it is I'm taking backups from my computers. We talked about that. Or for like me, all it takes is taking my GoPro, plugging it in, automatically uploads. If I'm on a 10 megabit connection, that connection is full just like that, just by plugging in my GoPro, and it could stay full for most of a day. If you have other things like an iPhone, and you're taking some pictures and it's automatically backing up, you want to send things to Flickr, anything like that, you're sending giant attachments by email, you're posting to YouTube, those things use immense amount of outbound or uplink bandwidth. And that's how you're going to end up possibly saturating things. And if that gets saturated, your download's going to stop working regardless of how much you have. That's where people get caught by surprise. They can think, well, maybe my upload is busy, I can't do any more uploads, but I can keep downloading, right? You got to have accessible bandwidth in both directions to be able to keep using either direction. If any one gets completely saturated, the other will be dramatically impacted and your overall performance will drop. So you always want to make sure you have sufficient, but download, we normally have massive excess amounts, and upload, we are normally stuck without enough. So this is where lots and lots of people end up doing very simple things and finding that their internet connection doesn't work well, and they are convinced it is the wrong thing. They'll say, I'm not able to stream Netflix. And of course, to make more money, their ISP says, well, you need more download bandwidth, which is not true. You need more available download, but it's made available by having more upload in most circumstances. So they sell you a bigger package, but what they don't tell you is maybe you had 10 by 10. Now they're selling you 20 by 10. It's twice as fast, they say, but the part that needs to be faster hasn't changed, and your experience won't change at all. If you're stuck because you're hitting that upload limit, you could go to 1,000 times as fast to download. You could move from 10 to 10,000 megabits per second, or 10 gig, and it wouldn't do anything more because it's not the thing that's slowing you down. And so understanding that is very, very important. From here in Nicaragua, one of the reasons that we like Nicaragua as a digital nomad location, as a long-term expat location, is that our latency numbers typically from here to the United States, where we typically do work, are so good that quite often, and partially this is just because the United States is very large, right? The distance from here, I guess it's important to explain, basically all the internet in Nicaragua Nicaragua comes eventually into Managua. So here in Leon, we connect by fiber out to Managua. Managua then runs across the country with fiber up over the mountains, through the jungle, and out at Puerto Cabeza in the northeast. And then they have a line that goes directly from there to Miami. Miami is a giant international hub for internet. And from there, it connects both to Europe and all throughout the United States. So when we are looking at how long it takes to get messages places, it's how long does it take for a message to get from Nicaragua, so from Leon to Managua to Miami, and then from Miami to wherever in the United States we want to go. So if you're trying to connect to a server that's located in Miami, your connection is excellent. If you're trying to get to one in Dallas, we normally notice that big, huge loop from here to Miami and then all the way back to Texas is about 55 milliseconds when we have a good connection. That's really good. From many places inside the United States, we would actually get longer connection times. So quite often we're getting just as good or better here in Nicaragua. And especially if you have the ability to move your services or they're already in Florida, then you're going to be even better still. It is a bit misleading. Our connections here do not come from Guatemala typically. They do not come from Mexico. So I have worked with companies that have hosting in those two countries, which are physically and by land very close, but Nicaragua does not have good internet connections to those locations. So major hosting centers in, say, Mexico City will actually appear much farther away than those that are physically farther away in Miami. Someone who's connecting to us from Mexico City, for example, will connect from Mexico City up into probably Houston, and then from Houston over to Miami and down to us. So it's farther away rather than closing. Still close enough to work just fine for most things, but not ideal. You do get better performance from closer ones. But connections to like New York, Texas, anything like that, really, really good. Same as if you're going from Miami to Seattle, you're going to introduce a little bit of latency, but not enough to be a major problem. We don't really have latency problems within the United States typically, but you do get higher latency numbers. But the things you really have to look out for is if you start exceeding latency of 200 milliseconds, it starts causing real problems with audio channels. And if you're doing a lot of like really complicated online stuff, you just want to keep your latency down as much as possible. But Nicaragua has such good latency that it makes it an ideal working location for doing business with the United States, or to appear as though you're working from the United States, because our speeds are so good that we appear as being inside the United States from a technological perspective. So anyone who's like, this looks and feels like the US, it does. So when you're buying internet, this is the big takeaway. You need to understand you've got three numbers. You really don't control that latency. Download, everyone's going to try to oversell you. If you're coming from North America, you will have such an emotional burden that you're expected to have speeds so ridiculously high for no reason that no matter how many times I say this, everybody will come out with, well, okay, I'll just go for 3 times what makes sense, right? I guess I'll just go for 300 meg when 100 meg would have been overkill. For most of you, the number you want to look for is 30 meg. If you want to splurge, 50 meg. Getting beyond that, you should have a real reason. Now, your upload, you want more than 10 for most people, and often that's going to be tough to get. I believe 20 is the highest we're able to get on Claro here. We make do with it. But with 20, we are constantly saturating the line and causing the download to stop working, but we can't get faster with that. Here in Nicaragua, services like Claro and Tigo typically are asymmetric, meaning you can get those big download numbers, but your upload numbers are tiny, so use them as appropriate. But you can get carriers like Teco. The dogs keep hopping up on the space next to me and drinking the water out of the flower pot. Services like Teco here in the country are normally fiber and symmetrical, and so you get much smaller first numbers, but much bigger second numbers. And so, for example, here we have 80 by 20 on Claro and 50 by 50 on Teco. We do everything on Teco because we never use the 50 down, but we use the 50 up constantly. Once in a while, we do put different things on different services, and if we're going to do things like stream a lot of Netflix, which use tons of download and effectively no upload, always need a little, then we'll put those on the Claro. They work fantastic, and we'll do all of our work on the Teco where it's more balanced. If that's the things you're doing, lots of streaming services, you're not uploading anything, you're not taking backups, you're not sending anything to anyone, then that upload really doesn't matter to you. But most people do use it more than they think they do, and it's important to understand when people are talking about how costly services are, if they're talking about how good they are, typically that upload number is going to be what tells you how good it is, how useful it really is for a business, for an advanced user or whatever, and that download speed is mostly inflated just to make you pay a lot of money. Because remember, the person who has a 50 megabit connection or the person who has a 300 megabit connection are not going to have any difference whatsoever for a call, for a video chat, for a Netflix, for any normal activity will be indistinguishable, because the extra speed is all beyond what you're able to use. You're not able to use what you already would have with the smaller number. Going to the big number is 100% waste of money. So it is tempting to buy massive amounts of excess because we're taught to do so. And because everyone says it, we become emotionally attached to it. But in the real world, it's just wasting money. So consider spending less and getting just as much as you had already. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. I'll see all of you tomorrow.